I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money.
Nobody saw anything wrong with this. Nobody saw nothing wrong with this. Joe Biden, on stage, in front of a large series of people, a large amount of people, argues, or at the very least he's lying about this in part, but basically says, look, I had $1 billion that I was going to give to the Ukraine. I didn't like the prosecutor that the Ukraine had. That prosecutor was investigating Joe Biden's, a company that Joe Biden's son worked with, where Joe Biden's son, without any experience in Ukraine or any experience in oil and gas, was making $80,000, I think, a month or something, some obscene amount of money. Now, making that much money with no experience in oil and gas with your dad as pretty much the viceroy of the Ukraine looks gross. It looks really gross, especially since the person was also a crackhead. Now, Joe Biden here is basically saying, I withheld money in order to get another country, sovereign entity, to get rid of somebody that was put into position not by the United States, but by the governmental device of that country. Now, Joe Biden saw nothing wrong with that. Now, when Trump did something similar, apparently, where he was supposedly holding money in order to get an investigation on this same Biden, especially around the issues of what was taking place in Ukraine, they impeached him for that. Now, whether it's Trump withholding money from the Ukraine because they want an investigation, or whether that's Joe Biden withholding $1 billion in order to get a prosecutor that was hired by the governmental device of that country, something that Joe Biden should have no say-so in or no power over, and yet Joe Biden is using the leverage of holding $1 billion to get the man fired. The reality of it is that prosecutor was fired. They did eventually get the money after the guy was fired. No. Joe Biden didn't tell the people that his son was working at that company making $80,000 a month, and that prosecutor was investigating that same company with potential investigations going into Biden's kid. Here's the catch. Joe Biden is being investigated, not in the United States. Well, he is. There are two investigations going on. One investigation is being done by the Senate, meaning Republicans in the Senate and the Homeland Security Committee has basically put a subpoena out on Wednesday for one Joe Biden. Now, the subpoena is going, the Homeland Security Committee, right? Now, they're doing a probe of Vice President Joe Biden and his kid role in the Ukraine. Now, whether you want to think it's politicized or not, it's going to be politicized by definition. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're doing is wrong. Any random American that doesn't have tribal instincts that have them associated with the wavelength of the Democratic Party, just a rational human being that's not tethered to the party, and you tell them that a man flames out of the military, is a crackhead, goes and gets a job at a company where he has no experience, either in Ukraine or in oil and gas, and his dad just so happens to be the person who's running that country by proxy because he's working with the United States. And you saw the power of Joe Biden at this point as viceroy, being able to basically get them to fire a prosecutor by holding money over their heads. So they're looking into it. So that's one investigation. But there's a second investigation that has taken place in the Ukraine, because if some other country forced the United States to fire the Attorney General, let's say Bill Barr, because they were holding something over our head, that would be against our laws. That would be illegal. The notion that another country uses leverage to get us to fire a public servant is mind-blowing, even though Joe Biden could sit here and talk about it as if it's no big deal. Well, by their laws, it's somewhat of a big deal. And there are moves that are taking place in the Ukraine to name the firing of Shokin a crime and to name Joe Biden as the perpetrator of that crime. Considering you have Joe Biden here basically saying, screaming to anybody who wants to hear it, that I did it. I don't necessarily know what you're going to use as evidence to say it didn't happen.
To convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give.
Just so we're clear, Joe Biden wanted them to take action against the state prosecutor. The country refused, or at the very least declined, by not taking action against the state prosecutor, in which case Joe Biden said, I held $1 billion over their head and say you need to fire him if you want this money. I don't know how clear cut you can get. That's pretty goddamn straightforward. Their argument has been, well, that guy was corrupt. Who cares? I mean, Trump can make the argument that some crime happened here that we need to investigate and I need you guys to do it. I'm withholding the money. Meaning, it doesn't matter why you held the cash. It doesn't matter. If you're going to say that Donald Trump was wrong for withholding that cash and it was an impeachable offense, then Joe Biden is also wrong for withholding cash in order to get somebody who was either elected and hired by somebody who was elected fired, and using cash to do so. The Ukrainian judge, I'll just read it. In Kiev last month, District Court Judge S.V. Volk, wow, that's a hard name, ordered the country's law enforcement services to formally list the fired prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, as a victim of an alleged crime by a U.S. vice president, according to official English translation of the ruling obtained by Just the News. This is John Solomon's thing. The court had previously ordered Prosecutor General's office and the State Bureau of Investigation in February to investigate Shokin's claim that he was fired in spring in 2016 under pressure from Biden because he was investigating Burisma Holdings, the natural gas company when Biden's son, where Hunter Biden worked. The court ruled that there was sufficient or adequate evidence to investigate Shokin's claim to Biden pressure on the president Petro Poroshenko, including a threat to withhold $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees announced, amounted to unlawful interference in Shokin's work as Ukrainian's chief prosecutor. And again, Joe Biden has already copped to it. He's already copped to it. That's not in question. Let's keep going. The other part is interesting. Law enforcement agencies opened the probe, but they refused to name Joe Biden as the alleged perpetrator of a crime, instead listing the potential defendant as an unnamed American. That is a big fucking difference. I could be an unnamed American. The vice president is something fundamentally different. You're basically trying to hide the fact that Joe Biden was involved in getting this man fired. Volk ruled that anonymous listing was improper and ordered law enforcement agencies to formally name Biden as the accused perpetrator. Biden admits to firing a prosecutor. It didn't take a few hours. It actually took several months. But basically the pressure that he put on got the guy fired. Biden admits to it. Biden tried to argue that the EU said that the guy was corrupt. Doesn't matter. You use $1 billion in order to force the guy out of office. It's impeachable by Trump. It's also, bad for you. On top of that, the judge basically said, yes, there was enough evidence in this case. Clearly, Joe Biden is out there bragging to look into this, to investigate this. And on top of the investigation said, well, no, you have to actually name the person who's the perpetrator of this crime. One Vice President Joe Biden. Now, the ruling orders a competent person at the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine who conducts procedural management in criminal proceedings to enter information into the United Registry or Register of Pretrial Investigations, a summary of facts that may indicate the commission of a criminal offense under paragraph 2, article 343 of the Criminal Procedure Code of Ukraine. Basically, what took place, even though Joe Biden is bragging about it, is against Ukrainian laws, just like it would be against our laws if they fired Bill Barr because somebody was bribing Trump to do so. It's a big deal. I mean, we don't look at it as a big deal because we look at every other country as a lesser country. But those are sovereign nations. And those sovereign nations elect people through a democratic process, and no democratic process, those people hire their cabinet, they put people in various positions of authority, and this was no different. The notion that a foreign country is going to get you to fire somebody in your own country is problematic, to say the least. It would be against our laws, and it is against their laws. Shokin's attorney confirmed the ruling to Just News, but said that the Ukrainian officials have not yet complied. Viktor Shokin's publicly appealed to the president of the Ukraine with a request to properly respond to illegal inaction in the investigation of the criminal cases that are open against Joe Biden. Now, whether this bubbles up in mainstream news, it probably wouldn't, because mainstream news tend to give Joe Biden a pass on issues like this. By the same token, they are doing an investigation. This is against their laws, and not just against their laws. There may be additional information that fall out of this case while Joe Biden is running for president. I'm excited about this. Basically, if this investigation kicks off, who knows what you might find out in regards to Joe Biden's function and role in the Ukraine. Media in the United States keeps saying there's nothing to see here, there's no evidence of a crime. It depends on what you mean by evidence, and it depends on what you mean by crime. It's a crime by Ukrainian laws, and anybody who is not a Democrat, and you tell them a crackhead crashes out the military, ends up getting a job, making $80,000 a month, working in a country where they have no experience in a section of the economy where they have no experience. They would say, that sounds a little dicey. Then you add the other piece. Yeah, his dad is vice president, and his dad is basically running the company. And him being on the board of that company give somewhat of a kind eye, despite the fact that this company was one of the most corrupt companies in the Ukraine. Well, anybody with rational brain, the overwhelming majority will likely say that doesn't smell right. But mainstream media, in their plight to protect Joe Biden, who's going to run in this race, act as if there's nothing to see here, folks. There is something to see here. And as this investigation unfolds, the question is going to be, what comes out of this investigation? Xavier Foster, did you hear Biden's audio of a big call yet? I have not. A big call. I don't know what that is. Was an audio tape between Biden and Poroshenko. Oh! No, I haven't heard that. But I got to be honest. I mean, whether you have the audio tape of that conversation or whether you have Joe Biden sitting here, Joe Biden is on stage admitting to the crime that they're accusing him of. I'm not quite sure where's the leeway here in regards to him trying to obfuscate blame for this. If there's a phone call between him and Poroshenko, that just makes it that much more over the top in regards to how guilty he is by their own laws. Whether they have any influence in the United States is unclear. The catch becomes, what does Republicans do? Now, if Joe Biden gets in office, you may have a situation where they actually try to impeach Joe Biden over what they did to Trump. It's unclear. I would say based on the investigation that's taken place in the Ukraine and the precedent set by the basic impeachment of Trump for almost the exact same thing or the exact same crime, he's fair game. Whatever you want to think, Democrats set the precedent. I'm going to listen to the audio tape between him and Poroshenko. Jamal Nabulik's YouTube channel has published the calls and commentary. Yeah, I'll check it out now. Like, share, subscribe. Believe it or not, I consider this to be good news. I mean, look, if you're going to argue that Donald Trump has no right to get somebody fired and hold money over their head in order to try to get some level of concessions, well, you can't turn around, even though Democrats will, and say that there's some difference between what Joe Biden is admitting to here versus what Donald Trump supposedly did. Fact of the matter is the only person that they have saying that Donald Trump actually did this basically admitted that he doesn't know that as a flat fact. And the sources that are taking place in Ukraine said it didn't happen. So, whatever. I'm just making a point that you can't be a hypocrite after impeaching the president for withholding money in order to get concessions, when Joe Biden has done the exact same thing here, and the Ukrainian courts are basically investigating the crime. Like, share, and subscribe. I will almost guarantee you Democrats will see a big difference between the crime that Joe Biden committed here and whatever they're accusing Trump of.